The galaxy was vast, filled with strange and powerful civilizations. The Vorl were one of the most respected races in the galaxy. They were known for their intelligence, strength, and wisdom. The Vorl people had ruled their world for centuries, and their influence spread far across the stars. But even the mighty Vorl had their challenges. Princess Lyra, the heir to the Vorl throne, was not like the others. She was strong and capable, but she was also stubborn. Her pride was unmatched, and she never liked being told what to do. She believed in her own strength and wisdom, and she felt that no one should decide her future for her. But the Vorl Council had other ideas. The galaxy was changing. The Vorlway were facing a serious threat, and they needed to form alliances with other powerful civilizations to ensure their survival. The council decided that it was time for Lyra to marry, but not just any marriage. This would be a marriage that would secure their alliance with Earth. The council had made a decision. Lyra must marry a human. Lyra could not believe it. A human? She had always looked down on humans. They were weak, small, and fragile compared to the Vorl. How could anyone expect her to marry one? But the council was firm. It was the only way to secure the alliance they needed. The human selected for this marriage was Ethan. He was chosen because of his strength, his combat skills, and his bravery. Ethan was nothing like Lyra had imagined. He was tall, with broad shoulders and piercing eyes, but he was still human. He did not have the power of the Vorl. Lyra found it hard to take him seriously. Their first meeting was anything but smooth. Lyra was cold and distant. She refused to show any kindness to the human standing before her. She did not want him, did not need him. But the Vorl law was clear. She had no choice. She had to accept him as her mate. Ethan, for his part, was equally uncomfortable. He had never imagined himself in such a situation. He had been selected because of his military background, and now he was standing before an alien princess, expected to marry her. He could feel her coldness, and it stung. He had always heard stories about how strong the Vorl were, how they ruled the galaxy, but standing in front of Lyra, he felt small. "What do you want from me?" Lyra's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence between them. Ethan hesitated, unsure of what to say. I don't know. I'm just here to do my part. I guess we don't have much of a choice in this." Lyra's eyes narrowed.
I
"Think I wanted this?" she asked, her voice full of disdain. "No," Ethan replied softly, his voice steady despite the tension. "But we're both stuck with it now." For a moment, there was silence. Lyra studied him, her gaze hard and unforgiving. She was a princess, and she did not need a human to secure her future. But her pride did not change the fact that the council had spoken, and she had no choice. "I do not want this," Lyra said. "At last, but I will do what is necessary, fit of Vorl people." Ethan nodded, though he couldn't help but feel the sting of her words. He knew she was not happy with the situation, but neither was he. This was going to be harder than he had ever imagined. As the days passed, Lyra and Ethan were forced to spend more time together. They would attend meetings with the council, visit important Vorl officials, and appear at public events. It was clear that they were meant to be a symbol of the alliance, though neither of them felt any connection to each other in public. They were expected to act like a married couple, but in private, they barely spoke. Lyra kept her distance. Still unsure about Ethan, he, in turn, felt out of place in the Vorl palace. Surrounded by alien customs he didn't understand. But despite the tension, something small began to change between them. One evening, as they walked through the palace, Garden Lyra spoke up. Her voice was softer than usual, as though she was not sure if she should say it at all. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked, glancing at Ethan. "You could have said no. I'm sure they would have found someone else." Ethan took a deep breath before answering. "I didn't have a choice either. But I figured ... I might as well make the best of it. We can both learn something from each other." Lyra looked at him, surprised by his answer. It was different from what she expected. She'd assumed he would just go along with whatever the Vorl said. But Ethan had a quiet strength about him that caught her attention. "You think we can learn something from each other?" she asked, almost amused. "I do," he said simply. There was a brief moment of silence as they continued walking. Lyra couldn't help but notice the warmth in Ethan's words. She had been so focused on her own anger and pride that she had never considered that the human might be just as trapped in this situation as she was. But that didn't change the fact that she didn't want this. She didn't want to marry a human, and she didn't want to rely on anyone else. The Vorel were strong, and Lyra had always believed that strength came from independence, to depend on a human, to care for him. It was weakness, wasn't it? Still, as the evening went on and they walked side by side, Lyra felt a strange unease in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan wasn't as much of a burden as she thought. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than she had given him credit for. But she wasn't ready to admit that just yet. Not to him, and not to herself. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra found herself spending more time with Ethan. The palace, once a place of comfort and control, now felt unfamiliar. The whispers of the council and the judgment of her people weighed heavily on her, and each day brought a new challenge. She could feel their eyes on her whenever she entered a room with Ethan by her side, and the feeling made her uneasy. At first, Lyra kept her distance, maintaining a cold and professional demeanor. She had made it clear that this arrangement was for political reasons, and that was all it would ever be. She refused to give Ethan the satisfaction of thinking it was anything else. But there were moments, small moments, when she caught herself staring at him, wondering how he managed to remain so calm in such a strange world. Ethan was, without a doubt, a mystery. He was a human, after all. She had seen humans on Earth through diplomatic messages and videos, but never up close. Yet he was different from the others she had imagined. He was strong, brave, and yet humble, never tried to push her into anything. He simply did his part, helping where he could and standing by her side. It was that quiet strength that caught her off guard. During the first few weeks, Ethan stuck to the plan. He did not try to change anything between them. He had come to understand that this was no fairy tale. He had been chosen as a mate for a princess, not as a partner by choice. But he did his best to respect her, to be her ally in this strange situation. One day, the council called Lyra to a private meeting. The room was filled with the elders, their faces stern as always. Lyra walked in, her gaze cold, and took her seat at the head of the long table. Ethan stood beside her as instructed, but he could feel the tension in the air. "Princess Lyra," council leader began, his voice deep and commanding, "the time for the public display of your union is upon us. The Earth ambassador will arrive in 3 days. It is crucial that you and your mate present a united front." Lyra's fists clenched under the table. She hated this. The thought of playing the part of a loving couple, a part she had no interest in, filled her with resentment. Her tongue, not wanting to make things worse. Ethan, standing silently beside her, could feel the tension radiating from Lyra. He wanted to speak, to tell the council that they didn't need to do this, but he knew better. This wasn't about them. This was about the future of the Vorel and Earth. He had to play along. Just as Lyra did, the council continued, "You must show strength, both as a ruler and as a mate. Your union is the symbol of our alliance. We will not tolerate any weakness." Lyra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I understand," she said coldly, "and I will do my duty." Ethan looked at her, his heart sinking. He could see how much this was affecting her, but there was nothing he could do to make it better. He'd been thrown into a situation where neither of them had a say, and they had to deal with it as best as they could. Later that day, as Lyra walked through the palace gardens, she could not shake the feeling of being trapped. The palace walls felt like they were closing in on her. She needed space, time to think. Ethan, having been given orders to stay by her side, followed her quietly. He could tell something was bothering her, but he wasn't sure what to say. Finally, after several moments of walking in silence, he spoke. "Lyra," he said softly, "I know this is hard for you, but you don't have to carry this weight alone." Lyra stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. Her eyes were cold, but there was something in her expression that softened for a moment. "I didn't ask for this." "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't ask for any of this. Council's decided my future for me, and there's nothing I can do about it. I don't know how to do this, to be with you, to pretend we're something we're not." Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady but kind. "You don't have to pretend. We don't have to be perfect. We're both in this together, whether we like it or not." Lyra felt a strange knot form in her chest. She had spent so long building walls around herself, walls that had kept her from relying on anyone, especially a human. She wasn't sure what to make of Ethan's words, but for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something other than anger or resentment. She felt understood. "I don't know how to trust you, Ethan," she admitted, looking away. "I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." Ethan remained silent for a moment, then spoke with quiet sincerity. "I don't expect you to. Trust me right away, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you, Lyra, whatever you need." His words were simple, but they hit her harder than she expected. She had never let anyone get close, had never let anyone see the vulnerability inside her. But now, with Ethan's steady presence beside her, she felt something shift. Maybe it wasn't all as bad as she had thought. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through this. That evening, after the council's meeting, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She was still unsure of where her feelings stood. She didn't want to admit it. But Ethan was starting to make her question everything she thought she knew about herself and about him. Over the next few days, Lyra and Ethan began to spend more time together, learning to navigate their strange and difficult bond. While Lyra continued to struggle with her pride, she couldn't deny that Ethan's calm, understanding presence was beginning to make her feel less alone. And slowly, the icy walls she had built around her heart started to crack. The future was still uncertain, and the path ahead was full of challenges. But for the first time, Lyra began to wonder if she had misjudged Ethan, and if perhaps the two of them could find a way to survive this forced union together. Days passed, and the tension between Lyra and Ethan began to fade only a little. It was clear that the uneasy truce between them had shifted. While they were still far from what anyone might consider a happily married couple, something subtle had begun to change. Their conversations were no longer just formal exchanges of duty and obligation. They were starting to really talk about who they were. One afternoon, Lyra found herself in the palace library, scanning through records of her people's history. Her father, the king, had always taught her that knowledge was the key to leadership. As the future ruler, she needed to understand everything about the Vorel, their past mistakes, their victories, and the mistakes they still made. Ethan, as usual, was close by, but this time he wasn't just standing off to the side. He had picked up a book from the shelf, a human history book this time, sat across from her. The quiet sound of pages turning filled the space between them. Lyra looked up from the ancient Vorel records, her eyes meeting Ethan's. She didn't say anything at first. It felt strange, this silence that had once been so uncomfortable but was now more natural. "Do you miss Earth?" she asked after a moment. Ethan paused, glancing up from his book. "I do. Sometimes more than I'd like to admit." "Tell me about it," Lyra said, surprising herself. She never thought she'd care, but something about Ethan's quiet demeanor made her want to know. She didn't know why, but she wanted to understand him better. Ethan looked at her with surprise, then closed the book gently. Different. There's so much life, so many places to see. People come from all walks of life. There's a kind of beauty in the chaos of it all. The cities, the nature, the mountains, the oceans. He paused, a faraway look in his eyes. It's hard to explain, really. Lyra leaned forward slightly, interested despite herself. Sounds ... beautiful. What is, he said, his smile, small but genuine. But there's also a lot of pain. The wars, the struggles for power, the way people fight each other. Sometimes it feels like it's all we know. Lyra nodded. She understood that. Her own people had fought wars for centuries, but there was something in Ethan's voice that made her feel like he wasn't just talking about his planet, he was talking about himself too. She thought about asking him about the pain he mentioned, but stopped herself. He might not want to talk about it. Instead, she shifted the subject. Do you miss ... home? She asked. Ethan gave a soft laugh, shaking his head. I guess I've never had one place that felt like home. I've moved around a lot, been in different places, with different people. But Earth ... Earth will always be home in a way. Lyra, feeling more relaxed than usual, nodded slowly. She didn't quite know what she expected from this conversation, but somehow it made the space between them feel a little less strained. Next few days were busy with preparations for the public event. Lyra had been instructed by the council to appear before the people and show unity with her human mate. It was essential for the Voral to appear strong and stable in front of their allies. Lyra felt the weight of her responsibility, but as much as she hated the idea of pretending, she knew it was necessary. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something in her was changing, and she wasn't sure if she liked it. Ethan, on the other hand, remained calm as always. He didn't let the pressure of their situation affect him as much. He was doing his duty, but he had begun to wonder about his own role in this. He wasn't just a pawn in the Voral's political game. He was a man with his own dreams and fears, and somehow, those dreams had begun to involve Lyra. One evening, they were sitting together in the gardens again, the sun setting behind the tall spires of the palace. Lyra felt a rare sense of peace. The gardens were quiet, the sounds of birds and the soft rustling of the trees were calming. It was the perfect moment to escape from the constant pressure of her responsibilities. You're quiet, Ethan said, breaking the silence. I was. Just thinking, Lyra replied softly, not sure if she should say more. Ethan waited for her to continue. He had learned over time that she would speak when she was ready. It's strange, Lyra finally said, her voice low. I spent my whole life thinking I knew what I wanted. I was going to rule, make decisions, lead my people. But now I'm not so sure. This marriage, this ... union, it wasn't my choice. I never imagined a life like this. And yet, here we are. Ethan leaned back, looking at her thoughtfully. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you expect. I think you're stronger than you know, Lyra. You've been through so much, but you still stand tall. Lyra looked at him, a little surprised. By his words, you think so? I know so, he said. You're a princess, but you're also a person. And sometimes, it's okay to question everything. You don't have to have all the answers right away. She didn't know how to respond to that. He was right, in a way. She had spent so much time trying to be strong for her people that she forgot how to be strong for herself. It wasn't easy to admit, but maybe, just maybe, Ethan was right about her. She didn't have to have all the answers right now. They sat in silence for a while longer, the setting sun casting a golden light over them. Lyra felt a shift in herself, a sense of openness she hadn't known she was capable of. As the days passed, Lyra found herself relying more and more on Ethan. She sought his advice on decisions, and his calm presence helped her feel more at ease. He didn't demand anything from her. He didn't push her to change. He simply supported her in ways that no one else had ever done. In turn, Lyra began to notice the small things, his quiet strength, the way he would always look out for her. When things got tough, how he made sure she ate properly when she was too busy to think about it. Slowly, a connection started to form between them, one neither of them had expected. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real. And as Lyra looked at Ethan, she couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold for them. Could she truly come to see him as more than just a duty? Could this forced marriage turn into something more? The answers weren't clear yet, but Lyra was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. It had been a month since the public event, and life for Lyra and Ethan had taken an unexpected turn. The coldness that had once defined their relationship had begun to thaw. They were not yet friends, but they were no longer strangers. In a way, they had come to depend on each other, though neither of them would admit it aloud. But even as they grew more comfortable with each other, a dark shadow loomed over the palace. One day, while Lyra and Ethan were walking through the royal gardens, a messenger rushed up to them, out of breath. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Your Highness," he gasped, addressing Lyra, "there's news from the Outer Rim. A fleet of unknown ships has entered our space. They're hostile. We've confirmed weapons are active." Lyra's heart sank as the messenger's words hit her. She turned to Ethan, her mind racing. Her duty as the future ruler was clear, but this was not just any attack. This was a threat to everything the alliance with Earth, the security of her people, and as she realized in that moment, to her future. "What kind of ships are they?" Lyra asked, her voice steady, despite the chaos swirling inside her. The messenger hesitated before answering, his voice low. "We don't know. Ships are of a type we've never seen before. They're advancing quickly toward the capital." Lyra's gaze turned hard. This was not just an attack. This was an invasion. The Voral had enemies, but they had never faced anything like this. Ethan stepped forward, his usual calm expression now replaced with focus. "I'll help you. Need all the strength you can get." Lyra shot him a glance, unsure of how to respond. She had always seen Ethan as an outsider, someone who wasn't truly a part of the Voral world. But in that moment she saw something different. In him, a warrior who had been through battles before and would fight alongside her if she'd let him. "You're not a soldier," she said, but her words lacked conviction. She knew Ethan's strength. She had seen it before, but she didn't want to admit it. "I don't need to be," he replied quietly. "I've fought in battles before. I'll do what I can." Lyra hesitated, then nodded. She couldn't afford to push him away now. The situation was too dire. "Then stay by my side," she said, her voice firm. "We'll need all the help we can get." The royal palace was soon abuzz with activity as word spread of the threat. Lyra called an emergency council meeting where military strategists, advisors, and diplomats gathered to discuss their next move. The atmosphere was tense, and for the first time since her forced marriage to Ethan, Lyra felt the weight of the Voral crown pressed down on her. She sat at the head of the table, her posture straight, her mind working to keep her emotions in check. Her people needed her strength now more than ever. "We've been tracking the enemy ships," the lead strategist said, showing a holographic map of the incoming fleet. "They're moving in fast. If we don't act quickly, they will breach our defenses." "How many ships are there?" Lyra asked, her voice calm but carrying the authority of a ruler. 25, the strategist answered. "They're heavily armed, but our fleet should be able to match their strength, given enough time to prepare." Lyra nodded, her eyes narrowing. "We don't have time. We need to act now." Ethan stood quietly at her side, observing the discussion. He had never been a strategist, but he knew enough to see that the council's plans lacked urgency. This wasn't just about strength. It was about speed, precision, making decisions under pressure. As the council debated their options, Lyra turned to Ethan. "What do you think?" Didn't hesitate. "We need to strike first. It takes out their lead ship, and the rest will hesitate. If we give them time to prepare, we'll be playing their game. We need to disrupt their plans before they know what hit them." Lyra looked at him surprised. "You're suggesting we attack?" "First, it's the only way to guarantee our survival," Ethan said. "The longer we wait, the stronger they get. We can't afford that." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. They were used to playing defense, but this was different. Lyra could see their doubt, but she also knew that Ethan's instincts were sharp. He wasn't a Voral, but he understood the need to act swiftly when lives were on the line. Lyra stood up, her eyes scanning the room. "I agree with him. We will strike first. Prepare the fleet." Her decision was met with murmurs of approval, though some of the council members clearly disagreed. But Lyra had made her choice. The fate of her people and her future depended on it. The next few hours were a blur of action. Lyra and Ethan stood together on the observation deck of the palace, watching as Voral ships mobilized. The fleet was smaller than the enemy's, but they had the advantage of surprise. The Voral forces, though fewer in number, were battle-hardened and fierce. They would fight with everything they had. Lyra couldn't help but glance at Ethan, who stood beside her, his eyes focused on the battle unfolding before them. He didn't belong here, not in the way the Voral did, but in this moment, he felt like a true ally. Lyra wasn't sure when it had happened, but she had come to depend on him. She didn't know what the future held, but for now, they were in this together. The battle raged for hours. The Voral ships fought with precision, and the surprise attack threw the enemy into chaos. Lyra's heart raced as she watched the enemy fleet falter, their ships struggling to regroup. She could see the change in their tactics. The Voral had caught them off guard, and now they were on the defensive. But just as it seemed the battle might be won, disaster struck. One of the enemy ships, heavily damaged but still operational, fired a last-ditch missile toward the Voral. "Command ship, no," Lyra shouted, her eyes widening in horror as the missile headed straight for the heart of their fleet. Ethan, without thinking, rushed toward the command console, activating the ship's defense systems. The missile was intercepted just in time, but the close call left Lyra shaken. The battle was far from over. "This isn't over yet," Ethan said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Stay focused." Lyra nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the console. She couldn't afford to lose focus, not now. The Voral had won the battle, but the enemy was far from finished. As the Voral fleet regrouped and prepared for the final assault, Lyra glanced at Ethan once more. They had made it through the first wave together, and she knew they would face whatever came next side by side. The Voral fleet had been victorious, but the cost was high. While the enemy ships were retreating, the battle had taken a heavy toll. Several Voral ships were damaged, and the command ship had sustained significant hits. Lyra could feel the weight of the victory, but there was no time to relax. The threat had been pushed back, but it wasn't over. The enemy would regroup, and they needed to be ready. Lyra stood on the bridge of the flagship, her eyes focused on the view of the stars outside. The calm of space had always been something she found comforting, but now it felt ominous. The danger was still out there, lurking. And she knew that the peace they had fought for was fragile. Ethan stood beside her, his presence a quiet strength. He had been with her throughout the battle, his calm and steady nature helping to guide her through the chaos. There was something about him, something beyond the duty he had been given, that made her rely on him more than she ever thought possible. The council had praised her leadership, but Lyra didn't feel the pride she expected. She was too focused on the future. What would happen next? "How long before the enemy struck again, Your Highness?" the lead strategist said, stepping forward. "The enemy has retreated to their last known position. Our forces have sustained damage, but we can continue the pursuit if you wish." Lyra turned to him, her expression unwavering. "Prepare the fleet. We can't let them regroup. We need to end this." The strategist nodded and left, issuing orders to the remaining commanders. Lyra looked out at the stars again, her thoughts racing. She couldn't help but feel a growing sense of uncertainty. The enemy was powerful, and their tactics were unlike anything the Voral had faced before. She didn't know how much longer they could keep fighting. Ethan, sensing her unease, spoke quietly. "You did what you had to do, Lyra. You led your people, and you protected them. But you can't fight this war alone. You don't have to do this by yourself." Lyra glanced at him, surprised by his words. He had always been by her side, offering his support without hesitation, but this time, his voice carried an unexpected depth. "I don't know how to lead my people through this, Ethan. Every decision feels like it could be the wrong one. Then let me help you," he said. "You don't have to carry the weight of the entire galaxy on your shoulders. You've already proven that you're strong enough to handle anything, but even the strongest warriors need allies. Lyra stood silent for a moment, considering his words. She had spent so much time trying to prove her strength to everyone, especially to herself, that she had forgotten what it meant to lean on others. She had always thought that leadership meant standing alone at the top, but now she saw the truth in Ethan's words. Maybe leadership didn't mean doing everything by herself. Maybe it meant trusting others to help her shoulder the burden. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't have to do this alone." Ethan smiled, a small but genuine smile. "You don't. You've already proven that you're capable of more than anyone ever gave you credit for. Now let others help you."
Lyra
Felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just the weight of responsibility that had been holding her back. It was her own fear of weakness, fear that if she relied on others, she would somehow fail. But in that moment, she realized that her strength didn't have to come from carrying everything herself. It could come from the people she chose to surround herself with. Over the next few days, Lyra took Ethan's advice to heart. She worked closely with her council, listening to their ideas and suggestions, and she took a more collaborative approach to decision-making. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. And for the first time, Lyra truly felt like she wasn't facing it alone. But as they continued their preparations, another danger loomed on the horizon. While the Voral forces were busy recovering and strategizing, an unexpected enemy appeared, one that none of them had anticipated. Lyra was in the command room when the alarms blared. A fleet of unknown ships had appeared, and they were headed straight for the capital. The ships were sleek and fast, their weapons powerful and precise. Lyra could feel the tension building in her chest. This was not the same enemy they had faced before. These ships were different. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, as though they had been waiting for this moment. "We're under attack," one of the officers said, his voice urgent. "The enemy fleet is already entering our atmosphere. We need to launch our defenses immediately." Lyra stood up, her mind racing. This wasn't just an attack. It was an invasion, and they weren't ready for it. "Ethan, we need to act fast," Lyra said, her voice steady, despite the fear gripping her heart. "Prepare the fleet for immediate combat. We can't let them land." Ethan nodded, moving quickly to assist the crew. His presence was a comfort to her, and as much as she wanted to give orders from the command room, she knew she had to be out there with her people. She had to show them that she wasn't afraid, that she was with them, fighting for their survival. The battle began in earnest, with the Voral fleet moving to intercept the enemy's ships. Lyra stood at the front of the command deck, her eyes focused on the tactical displays. The enemy ships were fast, their weapons devastating, but the Voral were skilled in battle. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the fight unfold. This time, it wasn't just her people at risk, it was everything she had worked for. Everything she had fought for. Ethan stood beside her, his face grim. "We need to take down their lead ship. If we can do that, the rest of their fleet will scatter." Lyra didn't hesitate. She had learned to trust Ethan's instincts, and she knew this was their best chance. "Target the lead ship, full power to the main cannons." The Voral ships locked on to their target, and the battle raged on. The enemy fleet was strong, but the Voral fought with everything they had. It was a fierce, brutal fight, with explosions lighting up the sky as ships collided in space. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lead enemy ship was destroyed. The remaining ships hesitated, their formation breaking apart as they tried to regroup. The Voral seized the moment, pushing forward with everything they had left. Lyra stood still, her gaze fixed on the unfolding battle. She had done it. Voral had won again, but this victory felt different. It felt like something had shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Ethan by her side, and for the first time, she knew they could face whatever came next together. As the battle came to a close, Lyra looked at Ethan, her eyes meeting his. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: they were stronger together. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Voral had fought bravely, and their victory over the invading fleet had been a hard-earned one. Yet as Lyra stood in the aftermath, gazing out at the stars through the observation deck of the command ship, she knew the peace would not last long. The galaxy was still filled with threats. It was only a matter of time before another enemy rose. Despite the victory, the Voral people were shaken. Their confidence had been shattered by the surprise attack, and Lyra could see the doubt in the eyes of her council members. But she refused to let that doubt grow inside her. She had fought for her people, and she would continue to fight for them. Her leadership would be tested again and again. But she would not back down. Ethan stood beside her, his presence a quiet support. He had been with her through every moment of the battle, and now, as they faced the aftermath, he remained by her, side. Lyra glanced at him, her thoughts drifting to everything they had been through together. She had never imagined that she would be standing here, with a human by her side, facing the future together. But here they were. You know, Ethan said, breaking the silence, we did it. We really did it. Lyra turned to him, her expression softening for the first time in days. Yes, we did, she said quietly. But this is just the beginning. There's still so much to do. Ethan nodded, his eyes thoughtful. I know. But you don't have to do it all by yourself. Not anymore. Lyra felt a flicker of something inside her. She had always been the one to carry the burden, to make the hard decisions, but Ethan was right. She didn't have to do it alone. She had people who cared about her, who were willing to stand with her. She had Ethan. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything, I couldn't have done it without you. Ethan smiled, his eyes warm. You don't need to thank me. We're in this together, remember? Lyra nodded, her heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. She had been so focused on proving herself, on showing the galaxy that she was strong. Enough to lead, that she had forgotten what it meant to trust others. She had forgotten that true strength didn't come from carrying the weight of the world on your own. It came from standing together, from working with others to build something better. Over the next few days, Lyra and Ethan worked together to rebuild the Voral forces. The damage from the battle had been significant, but it wasn't something they couldn't overcome. The Voral people were resilient, and they had Lyra to guide them. This time, she wasn't alone. She had Ethan by her side, and together. They were a team, as the Voral ships were repaired and the fleet prepared for the next phase of the war. Lyra began to feel something else growing inside her. It wasn't just the responsibility of leadership. That weighed on her anymore. It was something more personal. She had come to realize that she had feelings for Ethan. Not just gratitude or respect, but something deeper. She had fought so hard to keep him at a distance, to keep their bond purely professional, but she couldn't deny it anymore. She cared about him. One evening, after a long day of strategy meetings and preparations, Lyra found herself alone with Ethan in the quiet of the palace gardens. The stars were bright above them, and the night air was cool. It was a peaceful moment, and for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt like she could breathe. Ethan, she said, her voice uncertain. There's something I need to say. He turned to her, his expression softening. What is it? Lyra hesitated, her thoughts swirling. She had never been good at expressing her emotions, but now with Ethan standing beside her, she realized that she didn't need to hide anymore. I've been pushing you away, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to keep my distance because I didn't want to let anyone in. I thought that if I kept my walls up, I wouldn't be vulnerable, but I was wrong. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He just watched her, his gaze steady and understanding. He had always been patient with her, never rushing her, never pushing her to feel something she wasn't ready for. But now, as he looked at her, he could see the truth in her eyes. Hey, you don't have to be strong all the time, Lyra, he said softly. You don't have to hide what you feel. You've already proven your strength in so many ways. Let others be strong for you too. Lyra looked up at him, her heart racing. I've been so afraid, she confessed. Afraid of being weak, afraid of needing someone. I thought that if I needed you, it would mean I wasn't capable of leading. But now I see that I've been wrong. Ethan stepped closer to her, his presence a comfort. You're not weak, Lyra. You're human, just like the rest of us. And that's what makes you strong. You don't have to carry everything on your own. You have people who care about you, me included. For the first time in a long time, Lyra felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She had spent so much time hiding from her feelings, from the vulnerability that came with caring for someone. But now, in this moment, she realized that she didn't need to hide anymore. She didn't need to be afraid of needing someone, because Ethan had always been there for her. She knew that he would continue to stand by her side, no matter what the future held. Without another word, Lyra stepped forward, and for the first time, allowed herself to fully embrace the connection between them. She reached out and took Ethan's hand in hers, feeling the warmth of his touch. He looked at her, and for a moment, everything else in the galaxy faded away. Together, they were stronger than they had ever been before. And as Lyra stood there, hand in hand with the man she had once thought she didn't need, she realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But for the first time, she felt ready to face them because she wasn't facing them alone.